the building hasn't been painted in well over 30 years, and it's, everybody else is kind of updating and sprucing up the town, and so it's a good time to do it. They want to stay with the red and the white because they are Danish, and they want to stay with the, the Danish colors. It's not bright red, which was originally what it kind of was going after, so tried to soften it down a little bit. But yeah, that's just trying to freshen it up. And instead of it being just like one solid big red, we broke it up with the white as well. So open to any suggestions or, whatever you need from us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other public comments in the room? Please step up.
Hi, again, Dennis Beebe, Solvang. I'm just not sure what's being painted. I know Lisa knows, but seems like this is right next door to the Rasmussen's building, right? Where there is a gable where the color is split between two completely different colors. And there's a gable in Lisa's photo. I hope we don't do it again. So I'm just not sure where the red's going based upon the description, and I hope it's not a split gable like there is to the east. Thank you.
Staff, could you pull up the diagram again that shows the interior, or excuse me, the exterior? I think it was the one before that.
So between the two flags, it's right there, yes.
Okay, just to clarify that, and it would be, that is proposed for the red color, and it would incorporate fully those two columns. Can we clarify that? Okay. That is, and then please go on, Raphael, if you would, to the following picture that shows the, okay. And the underside of that arch is proposed for the white, as well as the interior arch and space, the ceiling space. And I'm getting an affirmative
Yes.
from the applicant here for those not in the room. Thank you. Anybody else like to speak in public comment? Okay, is there anybody on Zoom ready to speak? Okay, we're going to go ahead and close public comment now, and I'll bring this back to the committee for discussion. So, any comments?
My only question is, for the applicant, actually, is I love the color. I don't have any problem with it. I actually would love to see perhaps the undercarriage of the first archway even red rather than the white, but either way, it makes no difference. Yeah. As a suggestion.
Would the applicant have to resubmit showing that?
I believe that it could be instructed that would be a condition for approval.
I have a question. Has there been any thought of using the red as the trim color? You said there's one other shop, I think, in town that has that as a door and trim color, and having something that's a little bit closer to the rest of the building as the base color.
Come up to the mic, please.
Instead of using the white, we were afraid that it would just be too stark, and then a red trim. If you look, there's not really a lot of space for trim there. So that meant we would be doing the bottom of the pillars red, and we'd be doing around the window red, and everything else would be white. We might as well go back to the soft pink then, I mean, you want it, it's all about just freshening up and giving it, drawing, a little more attention, as far as their logos red and white on their windows. And so just more about being Danish, and, the pink wasn't so Danish. So, yeah, I think they're really firm on leaving the major part red and just sticking with white trim.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments?
So I feel like the facing the street, red is stark compared to the two buildings on either side. I also feel like the white could be toned down, a more cream or that crew. But I feel like and I would like to see the red also. But my issue would be that you've got white, then you have red, and then you have white. And I understand you want the business to pop, but to me, it's not as cohesive or. So.
I echo some of that, and I look at some of the standards that are required findings for us for approval or denial, and one of those is harmony of material, color, and composition on all sides of the building. And the concept has a lot of merits to it. My suggestion would be to go back to some of the tones that fit more with the old world, which are the organic kind of colors, because they had some very rich, vibrant reds, but they weren't at, old world Denmark, they couldn't make a red like this vibrant of color. So something that's more on the earth tone, because it's a very stark contrast between your very bright contemporary white and the very bright red. So keeping the same concept in place, but utilizing colors that would also likely be seen as a color palette is developed for our new kind of standards. We've got a couple of books, and I was looking at how your colors compared to in there, and I didn't realize it was the Z-Folio front door. As a little pop for contrast, it has a place, but perhaps there could be something that was, again, more of that organic tone in keeping with the old world in Solvang, and then also aligning with where we project the new design standards will take us with a color palette. There are a couple of books here. Do you want to pass like that paint palette that's in the big book, or maybe it's inserted in the small book? I think it might be inside the smaller book, Raphael. And again, these aren't adopted because this is we're in the limbo here between the old and the new. But as you look at a palette like this, you can see there are some tones that run similar, and there are in the other book as well. But it's got more of that earthy tone to it that is more fitting with the old world look, and you could still maintain your red and white. It's not going to be as vibrant as a Danish flag is today, but I like the concept of all that. I mean, that's kind of fun. So as to the applicant, I'm wondering if any of that, how do you, colleagues, how do you feel about that kind of conversation for a request of our applicant? And then if that was something that was doable, Raphael, would that require the applicant to return with their new color palette? Would we be able to approve something that could be completed by committee? How does that work if the applicant were to agree to that? Looking at moving your project forward.
For colors, I would actually suggest that it come back, simply because it's one thing to ask for a little bit toned down to a hue, but here you're looking for a different color, and the applicant had provided a swatch originally on the building. So, I mean, I would recommend they work with city staff, and actually city staff can work with the applicant to provide probably better renderings. So that way the DRC has a better idea of what those colors will look like against the arcade and facade.
I did go look at your sample, and thank you for doing that. That really kind of inspired this conversation. because I felt as though, again, looking at what we're tasked to do with creating kind of a harmonious relationship with what's there, is this red did not seem to complement the existing brick in that location. And again, because the brick's been there longer than the paint, within the environment that you're looking at placing it.
Oh, I have a suggestion, maybe if they're willing to look at the old world paint samples and pick tonight, then that would probably help them out. I'm just happy they're going to be painting. I think it's great that they're improving the look of the building that's not been painted for 30 years. But I agree with Esther on the old world look. I think that there's a color in there that you guys could definitely agree on, and the trim to tone it down just a tad.
I'm not sure if we can do that from the perspective of public comment on a project like that. I may have to come back. Mr. Attorney?
Well, there's a couple ways that I could see you doing it. Yes, you can refer it back to staff and have it brought back at a subsequent meeting. The other thing is you could table this for the moment, allow the applicant to take a look, and then bring back at the later in this meeting. We still have some time to do this. That's an option, but it's a little difficult to do it from the dais and negotiating, so to speak, from the dais. So those would be the two ways that I would see proceeding.
Lisa, could you bring the other book up here as well? Because there's another color palette that's a good option here as well.
While she's doing that, let me make one other comment. My only real concern with it is the elevation that faces the street. The actual storefront, I think, is fine. If that wants to be a red, it may be a different sort of red. But the elevation that faces the street, as my cohort here said, really breaks up that street. There's yellow from the new old Rasmussen store. Then there's a kind of a pale color, and then there's a gray one, a couple of them down. If this one is splitting the storefront yet again, I think it kind of doesn't match as well. So I don't have any problem with the red pretty much anywhere else if we come up with a great red, but the elevation that faces the street, I think, could be a little bit more complementary to the rest of the building. It does definitely need paint, though. I drove by this afternoon.
I think, too, a note that going forward, that when there is a facade that runs across multiple businesses and properties, there are going to be requirements put in place that there's a consistency there, which we've already seen how that doesn't work with a recent project. So kind of, again, being a bit in between here as the new codes and palettes are put together. So what I would like to suggest is that we have a motion to table this until later in the meeting. Yes, Raphael?
So we do have one item on the agenda for next month, and it's actually the neighboring building. And so my suggestion is that, because city staff deemed that complete after our deadline. So my suggestion is to continue this item to the next meeting.
Yes.
With the direction that's given. So that way we can then coordinate the two together in a much more cohesive presentation that I think is worthy for the DRC. Again, the point of us bringing this to the DRC is to not hold up the applicant.
Yes.
But in this instance, you had the neighboring building owner coming a few weeks later. So this would actually provide an opportunity to potentially work with both applicants at the same time to bring a product to the DRC, so that way they can see the facade the way it is. And I'm way too wordy right now, so.
I think that's excellent. That's information we were unaware of. Then there are some excellent resources, another really good paint palette here that I think is likely to be the bones as we move forward. I'd like to also note that the white kind of is a bit like the red. It's very bright, and it would fit better within the environment in which you're placing it. If you make it also a little bit more of an organic color would be my recommendation. So I guess then, do we have a motion to continue this item until the March meeting? Yeah, would you, can we reopen public comments?
Well, this is a question of the applicant, so.
Okay, All right.
So we are a bit aware, obviously, because it is the neighbors. We're aware of the colors as well. So where if we go to white and then theirs is approved at their color, then it's still going to be chopping that up. And then if the third arch decides to do a paint, now you're going to chop it a third way. So there, you know, which I don't. My point also is that there's obviously different trim colors coming in as well. And so it's all going to be different however you look at it. You know, I mean, because you don't have, it was the same way with trying to do the PowerPoint, or not the PowerPoint, but the image for you. You can't go in and just paint that archway. It paints the whole block, the whole building, okay? So you're going to still have different colors going down the street as long as, you know, people are coming in and doing it. So to me, I mean, we're more than happy to, you know, have you talk, you know, let us look at stuff, make the decisions at the end of the meeting today and go on from there, because it's still going to be different. You know, they may, there's could be a different color red. Now it's going to be, you know, the reds together. And either way, if they're both red, we're going to blend either way, or we're going to stand apart from one another.
Given that there is an application coming in for the adjoining property, as we are tasked with finding that harmonious, I mean, I can read for you, the harmonious relationship between existing and proposed developments, harmony of material, color, and composition on all sides of the building. It just seems as though, given that we have this opportunity to look at the two of them at the same meeting, that it's would be better to postpone this until next meeting.
I so move.
Okay, do I have a second? Thank you. Okay, I've got a first to continue this until the March meeting. Do I have a second?
I second.
Okay, Lisa, roll call vote, please.
Member Melissa Bates?
And this is to table it.
To continue, so it's essentially, the item will be, when we continue an item, the item will be brought back to the DRC at its next meeting. So it'll be your regular March meeting.
I vote yes.
Member Getz?
I vote no.
Member Johnson?
Yes.
Vice Chair Boyd?
Yes.
Chair Jacobson Bates?
Yes.
Motion passes 4-1.
Thank you for bearing with us while we look at the neighborhood, and we look forward to seeing you back next month. Okay, we're going to move on to item 5C. Staff, can you please introduce that and provide the report?
Yes, the item is for discussion and recommendation for land use permit 23302, amending a previously approved development plan for proposed exterior and interior tenant improvements and a proposed 5,906 square foot addition for a proposed in total 10,737 or 734 square foot building for a market and restaurant located at 1714 Mission Drive, APN 139-240-034. The proposed project is category exempt from CEQA. All right, so before you again, as mentioned, is an amendment to a previously approved development plan. So the development plan was approved in August of 2022. The original plan was to convert a bank, into a deli, market, and restaurant. At the time, the applicant had proposed an addition to the existing structure at 5,713 square feet, and they had additional frontage improvements that were included as well. So as a part of the initial work after the approval, the applicant and their team went in the building, and they discovered that there are some structural issues with the building with what was originally proposed. So the applicant is requesting an amendment to the approved development plan this evening. So those are modifications to the development plan to increase the addition size, as well as other modifications that are presented via this report. So just to give everyone a little location of where we're at, this is the old bank building. It is in the Village Mixed Use VMU, formerly known as TRC. So it is represented in the pink color right there. It's adjacent to Mission San Ynez, as well as the city's parking lot to the south. At the corner of Alisal and Mission, there's currently a construction project which is currently on pause. It is the Lily Sod 9-unit cottage. So that's something to sort of keep in mind as we go along. So the proposed project is the applicant is seeking an amendment to this approved development plan. So part of it is to reconfigure the proposed addition to fit the proposed new operations, dropping the sort of the deli portion. The proposed increase to the addition from 5,713 square feet to approximately 5,900 square feet, which is 187 total square feet increase. Continued demolition of the side of the porte cochere, the entryway, which is revised in the proposed amendment. So the original approval had the proposed amendment, or had the proposed entryway kept. Replace the brick with stucco, so that is one of the major changes on this. So in the originally approved development plan, there was a significant amount of brick that was going to be retained. That is now being proposed to be all stucco, and utilizing the half timber with a lighter, and utilizing a darker brown half timber and a lighter red hue, or a more organic paint color. And then, of course, revising the approved landscaping plan, including along the southern property boundary line. So just to give an idea of what's going on here, the picture on the right is the the picture on the left is the originally approved plan. The circle on the right shows where the new proposed addition is going. So you see the building's just a little bit more enlarged. Additionally, the applicant has significantly revised the parking diagram. And so in this instance, they are proposing one-ways in and out, and then parking along more of the interior lot line towards the Mission. So this is, in city staff's opinion, a much more superior parking configuration that was previously presented. These are the proposed new elevations on the eastern end. So the east end is essentially the end that's facing the parking lot, or excuse me, the west end is the one that's facing the parking lot. And then here on the east, this is where the old drive-through used to be. So sort of, again, orienting yourself on where you're at if you're very familiar with the site. So this elevation here faces the parking lot, and this faces the old drive-through. And then on the north-south elevations, the north elevation is the elevation facing Mission Drive, as indicated in your staff report. And the south elevation is the elevation that faces the city's parking lot. So very similar to the last three items that were before you, we have various documents that we have to have consistency with. And the first one is the community design element. The community design element was recently adopted, completely redone as a part of the general plan update, which was adopted by the City Council in 2024. So the proposed amendment is consistent with a lot of pertinent policies of the community design element. However, there is one policy that did stick out and that we did flag in the staff report, is that the policy states that the city shall require street and structure lighting using dark sky standards to minimize visual and ecological impacts by preventing glare. And inadvertently in your packet, which is why it's included in there, but it was posted as part of the digital packet, the proposed light fixture was not included. So this is included here in the presentation. And so this is the proposed light fixture. City staff feels that this does not meet the objective design standard, which we'll get into a little bit later on. But again, this sort of shows you the connection between a policy, which is here, and then the actual zoning implementation, which is the objective standard that we have. So the policy sort of outlays it, but the objective standard really provides what needs to get done to this. So in this instance, city staff recommends that this proposed light fixture be modified to meet the objective standard. The second set of documents that we need to ensure that we are consistent with is our design guidelines. Our design guidelines were adopted in the late 80s, so they're still around until they are unadopted. So one of the items that is on there, we did want to point it out, is that the windows must be divided into panes with horizontal and vertical painted mullions, and windows shall be deep set to maintain the appearance of thick walls. So here you have a building that doesn't contain any of these elements. The applicant proposes to maintain the existing look of with no panes, and the building predates the approval of the city's design guidelines. So with all that being said, this is where, again, the design guidelines is generally just that, a guideline. And the applicant is utilizing the consistency of window types throughout. So we are recommending to move forward as proposed with the consistency without the proposed panes that are in the guidelines. So finally, we get to actual standards versus guidelines and policies. And so again, the proposed amendment is located in the Village Mixed Use, or VMU. The proposed amendment meets all the minimum and maximum development standards for the VMU for zoning. That is included in one of your tables in your staff report. One also new caveat, this is one of the first items off the chute with our new zoning ordinance, which was adopted in December and went into effect January 8th. This project was actually originally submitted as an amendment back in 2023. And so we've gone through, this is actually the staff's third round of review for this. So during that time, we were working on these new standards, so, and I'll get into the next couple slides, but this essentially falls into where it was under the old standard, but now we have a new standard, but it meets the majority of the old standards, and we'll get into that in a minute. So, again, this is under the DD1 zone, and so the objective standards are a sort of a starting point for new development, and so that's sort of this reminder to this committee and to those that are watching that our objective standards is where you start. If you typically don't meet, if you don't meet the standard, city staff can reject out. We are making an exception here because, again, this project came in for resubmittal on December 13th. So as we were gearing up to implement, but the project meets pretty much 98% of the objective standards. And then not all objective standards are applicable to the proposed amendment. So we did provide a table in your staff report that went over some of those standards. So in facade, wood, what we're looking for, and in sort of wood, stucco, et cetera, it has that. The one item that we did point out was the blank walls. It partially met this standard, and so particularly on that west and east elevation, which is pointed in your staff report, and there are ways we can discuss in terms of getting the project to the standard. For as far as half timbering, it did meet the minimum depths and in spacings for the half timbers. And the roofing materials had met with architectural grade asphalt composition. The window placement is consistent. The window proportions of either 2:1 or 3:2 ratio are also consistent. Window trim and then lighting was the one we had pointed out earlier as a part of the community design element, and we again repointed this out as the objective standard. And then finally, trash enclosures, which is actually a new one because we didn't have any trash enclosure standards for the longest time, but it does meet this as the trash enclosures are articulated and are consistent with the architectural theme that's provided. So again, the objective standards, the east facade does not meet the objection as it is a blank wall. So again, because of how the applicant has submitted this prior to the standard, typically are in the standard, it states there are 3 ways to meet this: through pop out and articulation, through placing a window or door, or through some sort of landscaping treatment. In this instance, we are proposing just either 2 items, either the additional half timber design for that east elevation, so again, continues it on, or the use of window. So one of the 2 items, if it's placed on this elevation, would then would help meet the standard on the east side. And again, this is pointed out in your staff report, it's just under 19 3/4. The standard is 15. So essentially every 15 feet, you got to have either a pop out or a window or some articulation. Again, this is taking our policies of what we previously had, and it's just been out there in space for each and every one of you to separately interpret, for us to basically say, hey, this is the actual minimum standard. Did you meet it or not? The second one is the proposed lighting. Also doesn't meet the objective standard. So again, the lighting fixture is there for you. City staff is proposing a condition that the lighting fixtures be shielded and directed light downward as approved by city staff and consistent with the objective design standards. Again, the entire purpose of that standard is so that light does not obtrude up. There's also old light poles that are here. We are going to carry over a condition to eliminate those and bring those back down to conformance with the objective standard with max 15 feet. So those would be conditions carrying forward. Now for the west elevation, so there is a caveat to that. As you saw, the west elevation does not have any windows or sort of, it has the half timbering articulation. With the proposed addition, that addition creeps very close to the property line. So as much as we can sit here and have kumbaya with all of our design standards and objective standards, there's one sort of outlier that kind of gets us, well, sometimes it'll get you, and that's unfortunately our California Building Code. So the California Building Code prescribes where windows and other what they call methods of ingress and egress take place. And so particularly if you're in a residential condition, if you're within 6 feet, you need a fire-rated wall, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that gets added to it, and you typically can't have a window that's closer than 6 feet to the property line. So if you ever walk through your house and wonder why you don't have a window and you're so close to the property line, there's your answer. And so the same thing in this condition is it applies for a commercial application. In addition to that, based on the applicant's preliminary floor plan and in speaking with the applicant, they are looking at more back of house uses on that west side. So with the back of house uses such as storage, et cetera, that lends it again to not necessarily warrant windows and other articulation. And then the final issue that we have is this is actually an interior lot line. So currently right now, we all see it because there's an empty lot there. But in theory, and currently if construction restarts back up, we will have landscaping on that west side. So essentially you don't even see the facade anymore. So that's why it was sort of pointed out in your staff report, and I'm discussing this now verbally, but it's why we aren't recommending at this point any additional facade changes to that west end. However, that can also be a discussion for the DRC as well. So what are we asking of you this evening? We are asking a couple items. One, ask questions of city staff. You've clearly done that for the last 2 items, but again, please pepper us with questions. Second one, ask questions of the applicant team. The applicant team is here. Lonnie Roy is the designer for the applicant, so he's here to answer a lot of questions. He's pretty good at those things. And then finally, provide a recommendation to the Planning Commission. So we are looking for a recommendation this evening to carry this forward. And the reason being is, I've learned my lesson once where I noticed something ahead of time and had to pull back. So we are looking for a recommendation because once that recommendation is done, then we can then move on to the Planning Commission step. And as a part of that step, we do have to do what's called a legal notice. We have to do a mailing notice as well to property owners within 300 feet. And so the items that are discussed before you are items that can be conditioned. Essentially, there are items that city staff can essentially bring those forward to the Planning Commission, and then we catch those items at building plan check. And then with our new code, we definitely do have a lot more teeth for these items, which is great, which is the primary drivers of why we wanted a new code to be adopted as soon as we can. So with that, I will open up to the commission for question, or to the committee for questions.
Okay, any questions? Who wants to start? Okay, it looks like no questions from the committee, so I'm going to go ahead and open this up to public comment. We'll start with anyone wishing to speak in the room. Mr. Beebe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dennis Beebe, Solvang again. I didn't study the plan. I think it's a great improvement. This building is right almost in the center of Solvang. So there's an opportunity here to make it look more Danish than it did. So covering it with stucco and putting external beams on it is a great start. The only thing I didn't like, based upon Raphael's brief description, was looked like picture windows facing Mission, and instead of multi-pane windows. And that was my only disturbing reaction to the description. Otherwise, it's a great move towards making this thing look more part of Solvang than it did.
Thank you. Any other comments or public comments in the room?
Hi, my name is Lonnie Roy. I am the agent for the applicant. So to give a little bit more light to the proposal, so the prior project, the architect assumed that that brick was just a veneer, and what we found out while moving into construction documents was that it's unreinforced masonry. So we would have had to do a full structural upgrade for the prior project. So the reason for this change is we're only limited to modifying those exterior openings by 10% along each elevation. So essentially, we're doing an addition that, from a structural standpoint, is independent from the existing structure, but it will appear like the same structure. So the additional addition in that existing drive-through area is because we need to get that addition beyond the existing building to allow that back-of-house operations to happen for the restaurant portion. In the prior project, regarding the prior public comment, did go to DRC 2 times. The first one did have divided lights, and at that time, the DRC did not think it looked very good on that building. So that's why this current application continued with not including those on this proposal. And here for any other questions.
Thank you. Any other public comments in the room? Okay, then we're going to go ahead and open it up to Zoom. I think I see a hand raised.
You do. Can you hear me?
Are we okay? Okay, yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I'm Susan Bott, representing the Save Our Stars Committee of We Watch. The proposed outdoor lighting for this project of the village is in violation of the Village Design District standards, which requires fixtures to be fully shielded and limited to 15 feet in height. They should be designed to project light downward such that the light source or lamp is not visible parallel to the viewer's line of sight. If you're even with the edge of the lamp, you shouldn't be able to see the light source. Solvang's code says fully shielded fixtures shall be utilized that direct light downward and prevent light from escaping upward. Fully shielded lighting is readily available, and there's no reason to violate the code. We agree with city staff's proposal to mandate lighting that is shielded and directs light downward. Thank you for your help.
Thank you, Susan. Is there anybody else on Zoom? Okay, I don't see anybody, so we're going to go ahead and close public comment now, and we'll go ahead to committee discussion.
I guess I have a question. We got a sheet here with brick to match existing. Where are we putting brick to match existing? It looked to me, in looking over the documents and the drawings, that we were covering over existing brick or deleting existing brick.
The brick is a cap material on the trash enclosure and the monument sign out front. So those would be the two locations.
Not on the building itself.
Correct.
And since you're there, permeable pavers are for portions of the parking lot.
It's for portions of the pedestrian walkways. The parking lot is largely going to remain the existing asphalt, just kind of new saw cutting for the tree locations.
Yes.
Was there any thought to breaking up the west elevation anymore with half timbers or pilasters or something?
We're open to that. Generally, I would say we're supportive of all of Raphael's recommendations. The one caveat I would say on that east elevation portion, we'd be supportive of adding half timbers because adding a window there would be a little bit difficult with the structural requirements.
And what kind of landscaping are you planning on using on the west side?
So we're proposing a ligustrum hedge, the smaller variety, so it will naturally get about 6 or so feet. So that's kind of our intention, is to generally just cover up with landscaping, but at the initial install, we're okay adding additional half timber detailing if the committee would want that.
Thank you. We may call you back. Other comments?
I think it's just important that regarding the Lilysog Cottage Hotel that's going to be right there, in terms of however those are being built. And while you're staying there, what are you looking at? What's the lighting going to look at? What's the architecture going to look like? What's the landscaping going to look like, I think. So just something to keep in mind, perhaps, especially the lighting. I don't think I want to stay in a hotel or a cottage with bright lights back there, if there are going to be lights back there.
So making it cohesive with the neighboring property, which is the same owner, and I'm sure that would be their intent as well. The bricks, thank you for explaining, because it was like sad to see that all the bricks were going to go away. I was hoping that there were areas where you might be able to retain the bricks to integrate in with the new color. Compliments on the color, which mimics the brick. I think that you've got a color that fits in with, as we look towards changes, and it's got that kind of earthy tone. The long western elevation that fronts the Lillisod property, I'm not quite sure if that's where you meant that for the half timbers along the long spans. I'm getting an affirmative there. That spans that's closest to Mission Drive would be optimal to have that broken up with windows, a couple of windows, where it will be in the visual corridor from Alisal and from Mission, even with the new construction. And applicant, maybe you would like to speak. Is that structurally feasible?
That portion would be the proposed, so structurally it's fine. If we run into that building code issue that Raphael was mentioning, that it's too close to the property line to provide windows there.
Oh, so that's what you were referencing in specifically then? Okay, I misunderstood that after a conversation earlier today with Raphael. So then, yes, that needs to be broken up with some more half timber variation and some real thought as to the landscaping, in particular on the end that is closer to Mission. I think there's a lot of existing olive trees that are down towards the farther end on the neighboring property that will soften it. Perhaps there's something that could go in that more immediately would have a little bit of height to break up that kind of first part of the building that could immediately soften it as well. Couple of comments here. The lighting, you've already heard the comments about that, and my recommendation would be to follow the city to make sure that they're all night sky compliant and meet codes for parking lot lights. With Jennifer's comments, and I'm sure that you'll be considering that, given that the property next door is also, part of the same ownership. The landscaping, I believe that Raphael had mentioned that there are some changes to landscaping. Raphael, did you have comments about that? And
Yeah, given the
maybe
light.
you want to,
Yeah.
applicant can sit back down, but maybe we'll call you again if you don't mind.
So with all these landscaping plans, they are proposed and they're not set in stone until they actually go through the plan check process, and during that plan check process, it has to meet what's called MELO, which is the Model Water Efficiency Landscaping Ordinance. So it's the state had made this enacted this law. I would say 2012, 13, give or take. But given the recent situation in terms of the Southern California wildfires, there's been more sort of attuned to attention of landscaping. Well, we all love landscaping. There's certain landscaping that's by the building directly adjacent sometimes can be used as fuel for those fires. And so being a little bit more fire ready, and as well as more conscious of, while we love the landscaping, we also need to also protect human life and safety and reduce the amount of shrubs and vegetation adjacent to buildings. And it's typically about 5 feet is what fire department typically requires these days. So it is something that we are likely going to carry forward as we start, again, this wasn't one large amendment the first time. We now have a couple of items, and landscaping was one that needs to be amended to be part of the 21st century and not part of the 20th century.
Does this apply to commercial as well as residential?
It very much does. I mean, again, if you look at the tragedy that was in Southern California, it wasn't just residential or condos,
Clearly, it was
commercial.
entire
It's
community,
entire
yeah.
community. So, again, being much more conscious of where we are at in terms of our fuels and those items, the more we can program buffers and barriers, the better we are, and try to sort of skirt the line of making it look nice landscaping wise, but be very conscientious of what we're actually planning.
With that comment, then, there are clearly changes coming for the landscaping plan that'll vary from what we're looking at here. I want to really encourage the use of the tree canopy in the parking lot that creates that kind of shading and cooling for the paved areas. I did have a question on the parking lot. First of all, it's great to see diagonal parking. It seems like it's much, much more practical, less prone to accidents. This is really not as much maybe the purview of our committee, but my concern is the ingress and egress where there's a lot of crossing traffic. So if you're going out, you might be turning out into the path of somebody who's turning in. It would seem more logical that that they be switched, that this be flipped, that the entire parking lot plan have a little bit of a flip to make that path of travel safer for those going in and out. Applicant has some thoughts, or Lonnie does.
That was our thought as well. This was the traffic engineer who said this made more sense, but we're kind of your mind as well, that we think the other way would probably make more sense. So if we're open to flipping that. I don't think it changes the parking lot design, it just changes the angles.
I think it would be optimal to have it be flipped, especially as you come around the corner and you're trying to turn in and somebody's, you're coming from Alisal and trying to turn in. It seems like accidents waiting to happen.
Yeah, we agree.
And that's why it complements, again, on the diagonals. The other parking lot reminded me of New Frontiers, which can be scary. That would be a recommendation that would be, I think, go a long way there. I'm talking a lot. Anybody else have comments
I have
here?
opinions.
Great. Share them, please.
I like this project. I agree with Dennis that the windows-facing Mission could be more integrated, or more, less bank-like. I think that the half timbers on the east and west elevations are good solutions. I'm passionate about dark sky lighting, and so I would, definitely want to see that improve, both making sure the height is correct and that it's full cutoff. Let's see, what else did I like the paint. My question with the parking, and knowing that the parking situation in Solvang, how do you prevent people from parking there all day?
Like now?
Or is that even an issue?
Yeah, I mean, that would be something that they would have to try to monitor, but other than posting, tow away signs and asking of having someone watching the security cameras all day long and seeing that car hasn't moved, I don't know.
I know, and how would you or can you even enforce that? I guess that would be my question for Raphael.
It's a private property, so therefore it's up to the private property owner to enforce the parking maximums that are within their purview. And in that instance, as long as it's posted parking for tenants only and visitors, and it's properly cited with the California Vehicle Code, they can tow away.
Good, thank you.
So it would be posted, but yeah, I don't know
Right.
how vigilant they're going to be.
Right. All right. And I agree. switching the direction. It's not a Trader Joe's, so you can make it right. Thank you.
I'd like to circle around to the window discussion, and I was involved in the discussions about the prior design, and I honestly don't remember that part about windows and the divided panes not fitting. All that said, it is a completely different aesthetic that you now are presenting. And if I look at this, it appears that all the windows are being replaced. If they're being replaced, then let's have a conversation about how those can be replaced and perhaps better fit with our codes. In particular, when I think of the high-profile windows facing Mission, but the overall building as well. And Lonnie, would you like to join us again?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, it sounds like where this is going, I mean, hopefully the project moves forward to Planning Commission, but we'll have to come back to DRC for a number of items. I would say we can come back with that as an option, how these windows look with divided lights, and we can make a decision at that point.
That would be ideal. Yes. Thank you. Thank you for your willingness to look into that. We have two choices that were presented to us for the trim. We have the fiery brown and the Turkish coffee. And then we also have the body color, the Roycroft Rose. Anybody wish to make comments on those? And for those of you who haven't, these are kind of cool little lights. You can use this. They turn on and they show you the interior, the exterior, and the daylight. So it shows you the kind of different illuminations. Did you want to see it down there, Melissa? Okay.
Are we being asked to decide between?
Comments on it.
Okay.
I think tonight we're going to hopefully have some comments to help applicant move forward on and decisions.
I prefer the fiery brown over the Turkish coffee for trim.
I agree with that. We're trying to look at half timbering, which was traditionally wood.
Right.
The fiery brown looks more like wood to me than the other one.
And I think the Roycroft Rose works with the brick.
Interesting. I thought that the Turkish coffee looked more like wood. But what I do like is that we have options that all of which seem like they're strong options. The fiery brown has a lot of red in it.
Warmer.
I think it would go well with the brick then.
Yeah, but is there any brick in the building? The only brick is the trim on the trash enclosure. The rest of the building is all
So this
painted.
is stucco.
Yes. And yeah, the pervious pavers on the walkway. Yeah, so the brick,
So
there
it's
is no
minimal
brick.
amount.
Yeah. Yeah, if that was the case, yeah. So if we're going to return, Raphael and Dave, maybe give us some direction on what you would like us to, what determinations you would like us to make this evening.
Well, you can recommend approval to the DRC or to the Planning Commission, and in that recommendation, from what I heard, it sounds like on the east elevation, half timbers, based on what's outlined in the staff report, recommending that the applicant bring back the windows to the design review committee. I would suggest doing that prior to building permit submittal versus during building permit submittal.
Yes, please.
And it would be specified only to the windows and windows only. And then the dark, it sounds like to have a unanimous on conditioning the project to have dark sky compliant lighting consistent with our municipal code.
As far as the half timbers, those, I believe, should return to us because the placement of those for the design can be critical, as we've seen in previous where we've had applications where it didn't necessarily make sense. So
So if
I
you
would
want-
like to see windows and half timbers return. And it would be nice to have a more realistic, or that's probably not the right word, a landscape plan that's closer to actual?
So if that's the case, then it should be half timbers, windows, and landscaping plan prior to building permit submittal. So essentially, I don't want to craft it, the condition up here, but I'll craft it at Planning Commission to recommend the vehicle to use for that.
So at today, the primary decision that we would move forward with, I guess, is color. Do we do that? What are the...
Essentially, we want to move a project forward as complete as possible. So the goal is that a project comes as complete as possible, so we don't got to come back here.
Right.
And it's done, it's entitled, and off it goes to the building permit stage with now city staff implementing what's been done. So if the color has been settled, that the facade color is what's wanted, and the fiery brown is the trim, then so be it, and that's what will be the color.
So
Just let me add on half timbers on the west elevation as well. We talked about that a little bit earlier, about trying to break up the west elevation with some more half timbers.
Yeah, it would just come back for half timbering on the east and west elevations.
So we would, then the way to craft this would be something to the extent that, looking at recommendation for the land use permit for this project, approving a paint color if that is done, and then with the return for half timbers, windows, and landscape plan.
Right. So again, it would be, you take this, if the DRC so chooses, it could take what we've said right now. We would put down conditions on the project as a part of the amendment, because and then it would be very specific that the windows, the half timbers, and the landscaping plan would need to go before the DRC, and we would use our zoning clearance vehicle for that. So a zoning clearance would not be granted until those items are brought back to you guys.
Okay, I'm just trying to get the words to craft this motion here. That's why I was kind of repeating it, because of course we also want built into that the lighting is required to meet the standards.
Right, and so again, a condition would be added to say lighting shall be consistent with municipal code standard, and city staff will basically quote the standard, and we would review it against that standard at building permit submittal.
Okay, so let's have a quick final discussion on this paint color and make a decision, and then we'll put together the motion. Does that sound acceptable?
Sounds great.
Okay. So because this is all going to be wrapped into one, do we have some more discussion? We've got a consensus on the body color. It's the half timber, where we have the choice of Turkish coffee and fiery brown. So I'm thinking Turkish coffee, you're thinking, so hold up the color you like. Let's just do that. Okay, I think we see a consensus here, and I actually held up the wrong one, but it doesn't matter because we have a consensus. So we've got the paint colors. So now, staff, please help us craft this motion.
So it sounds like you want to move the project forward, recommending approval to the Planning Commission with the following conditions be added for as a part of this recommendation. Condition number 1 is that the DRC review the windows and half timbers on the all windows and half timbers on the east and west side prior to issuance of a zoning clearance. And then number 2 is that the all light fixtures are consistent with objective design standards as codified in the Solvang Municipal Code. And landscaping needed to be the one before on item number 1.
And number 3, landscape.
Well, landscape would be, so we would bring back to the DRC prior to issuance of a zoning clearance, the windows, the half timbers on the east and west elevations, and the landscaping plan.
Okay.
And then item number 2 is the applicant is directed to provide light fixtures consistent with the objective design standards as codified in the Solvang Municipal Code.
and that the committee approves and we don't have a motion yet, but that it would approve the Roycroft Rose for the body and the Fiery Brown for the half timbers.
That is correct.
Okay, so do I have a motion?
Yes.
Okay, we got a motion here. Second? All right. Lisa, roll call vote, please.
Member Melissa Bates?
Yes.
Member Getz?
Yes.
Member Johnson?
Yes.
Vice Chair Boyd?
Yes.
Chair Jacobson Bates?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes 5-0.
I just wanted to pass on my appreciation for the thoughtfulness that went into this redesign. As was mentioned, this is really a key property, and I think that it's going to end up being a beautiful building that'll be a lot of people going in and out of that parking lot. Maybe some of us sitting up here, we hope. So we wish you the best and look forward to seeing you back March or April, I'm guessing. Soon?
Soon.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Let's take a quick break. Let's do 5 minutes, okay? And then we'll go on with the meeting. So we're going to break for 5 minutes. All right, so we'll start the meeting here at 6:31 and go on to our presentation. Oral presentation, item 5D, regarding the Brown Act. Staff, please.
Well, thank you. Good evening. For those of you who don't know me, I think I've met all of you before, but in any event, I'm Dave Fleischman. I was assistant city attorney, then city attorney, now back to assistant city attorney. I've been working with Solvang since about 1998. So, but for a period of about 19 months, that's been a continuous tenure. So I am familiar with the intricacies of Solvang and the application of the state laws to Solvang's particular way of doing business. So I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. What I'm hoping you will take from this today is a high-level understanding of the various issues that you will be required to comply with in terms of your service on the DRC. I don't expect you to walk away from this having a super detailed understanding of those. That's why we are there. You can ask questions of us along the way if something comes up at a meeting at a subsequent point. That's why we're here at that meeting, to give you that guidance during the meeting. So with that preface, I'll go ahead and go into it. We're going to be talking about the Brown Act, conflicts of interest, due process, and the Public Records Act. The basic concept is that this is open government. The people have a right of access to the information and concerning the conduct of their business, and they don't delegate that responsibility to the bodies that they have created. So this is an oversight option for the public. It's founded originally in the Constitution and then statutorily through the Brown Act. Ralph M. Brown Act, this is Senator Brown. 1950s is when this first came about. It was California's original Sunshine Law. The purposes of the Brown Act are to allow public access to the decision-making process, public oversight of that process, and protection of legitimate privacy concerns of public agencies. I'm not going to spend much time on that, but that's what closed sessions are for. Those are pretty much the province of the City Council. But for those closed sessions, all meetings of the legislative body of local agency shall be open and public. You are a legislative body as the DRC. That term is broadly defined to include city councils, planning commissions, and other subordinate bodies. So what is a legislative body? Obviously, the city council, subordinate boards and commissions, standing committees with a regular meeting schedule. This isn't on the slide, but there are some private corporations that opt to be covered by the Brown Act because they receive public funding. They impose that upon themselves. They're not required to. What is not a legislative body? Advisory committees that are less than a quorum of the entire legislative body. And those are not very frequent at the DRC, but I could see that happening from time to time if you wanted to put together an advisory committee of 2 members. That would not be covered by the Brown Act. So the elements of what is a meeting under the Brown Act, it's the majority of the members of the body that are present in the same time and location to hear, discuss, deliberate, or take action on any item within the subject matter jurisdiction. If any one of those tiles is absent, then it's probably not a Brown Act meeting. So for example, knock out the last one within subject matter. If you're talking about NBA scores, all 5 of you at a cafe, that's not a Brown Act meeting. That is just a gathering of people talking about NBA scores. Same thing with the majority of the members present. If there's only 2 of you present, that's not a Brown Act meeting. There are some caveats to that I'll get into, though. The caveats are serial meetings. That means it's basically a compilation of subsets of a majority. So if you have 2 members of the council or of the committee getting together to talk about something, and then those people talk to a 3rd member, now you have a majority. They may not all be present at the same time and place, but they are coming to a collective concurrence by having that kind of discussion in a serial fashion. The 2 types are the hub and spoke and the daisy chain. The hub and spoke is you're using an intermediary at the middle of the wheel to convey information to each of the members. So that can be a staff member, that can be a member of the public, where you're conveying information saying, well, I think committee member X is going to be voting this way. I would encourage you to contact committee member Y and committee member Z to see if you can convince them. Using a third-party intermediary as the hub and spoke. The daisy chain is where one committee member talks to another, and then that one talks to a third or a fourth. Those are both prohibited serial meetings. Where else can you have serial meetings? Group emails and texts. Those are much more common. Replying to all on an email thread. Most of the time when we communicate to the entire body, we will send it by BCC so that a reply to all does not go to all. But just be very careful if you're sending an email about something within your jurisdiction to other members on the committee. The new one that we have to deal with, which is more and more frequent, are comment sections and social media. Believe it or not, there's a lot of Brown Act violations that happen on Nextdoor and on Facebook and on Instagram and on X, Twitter, where people will respond to comments. And all of a sudden you have 3 of the members of a committee that are talking about something in a non-agendized fashion. So that can be a Brown Act violation. So basically the tips that we talk about for electronic communications like that is don't communicate your position on a pending matter to a majority of the members of the committee. Don't solicit responses from other members when you're forwarding information you receive, and don't hit reply all. I mentioned the BCC, but ultimately the deliberations that you're undertaking should take place here in this room after an agenda's been posted, not by text or social media. The inclination is if someone has commented on it in public, some will find the need to respond to it. That's where you get into trouble. And the way the social media works, it's even less than a majority. So if, for example, one of you says, I like this particular color for this project coming up, and another of you hits a like emoji or hits the like button, now you have a Brown Act problem, believe it or not, even though it's not a majority of you, because now you're telegraphing to the world what the potential vote is going to be on that without it being in this room. So just be very careful when you use social media for any purposes relating to your service on the DRC. Okay, so what is okay to do? You can answer questions from the public. If someone asks a pure question, what time is the DRC meeting? 5 p.m. You can answer that. That's perfectly fine. You can provide information to the public along the lines of, we will be considering this application on such and such a date, and you can solicit information. Please come to the meeting and provide us your comments. But don't say something along the lines of, I'd like to know what you think of this particular project so I can figure out how to vote. That should be done in this room. So the do nots are make, post, or share comments between you all, like or use emojis. And as I mentioned, this applies to 2 members. The majority is not required. All right, so the serial meeting takeaways: avoid discussing city business with more than 1 other member outside a public meeting, avoid soliciting or communicating the views of other members outside a public meeting, and avoid interacting with the other members on social media. If you can keep those in mind, then you should be fairly safe. Teleconference meetings. I'm not going to go into this a whole lot, but there are a whole bunch of rules applicable to Zoom meetings, for example. So if you are interested in attending by Zoom, there are ways to do that. They just have a lot of procedural requirements, and it's gotten much more difficult. The way it used to be is the agenda for a meeting would be posted at the location where the person wished to participate. At that time, it was by telephone, and that's all that was required. Now we have significantly greater access through the things like Zoom and Microsoft Teams, and the legislature is concerned enough to add additional regulations on that. So I won't spend a lot of time on that. But there are ways to conduct meetings like this during emergencies. There are ways to attend meetings for emergency reasons. If you have something, a medical issue, or you have a good cause to do so, you can go ahead and attend that. And that's the AB 2449. I will point out, just because I helped craft the legislation, there was a change to this AB 2449 effective January 1st. One of my city clerks and I drafted the changes to that law, and it got passed unanimously in Sacramento. So we're pretty proud of that. It was a minor tweak, but the person who had written AB 2449 said, gosh, I wonder why I didn't think of that in the first place. So it makes it much more clear. And it's basically what you see at the end of that slide, that the teleconferences sets forth the specific numbers that you can do, and that wasn't in the prior legislation. Yeah.
So I had COVID last spring, and I missed a meeting, and I was going to Zoom in, because I felt good enough, but I was told I couldn't do that.
I don't know the full circumstances. I could certainly talk with you about it offline and try to figure out what the reasons were for it.
I was just told because the emergency was over, we were no longer allowed to do that because we could be influenced by others in the room that couldn't be seen on camera.
Yeah, that's the AB 2449 issues, and that's why the legislature put that together. There are specific procedural rules that you have to follow in that circumstance, and we have kind of a cheat sheet that we go through in those circumstances. But what the issue was under AB 361 specifically is you could only do that during a declared state of emergency. And once that declared state of emergency disappeared, that option wasn't available anymore. So I suspect that may be what it was.
Yeah.
But if you had COVID or you had some other type of medical, there are additional provisions now under AB 2449 that would allow you to participate remotely.
Thank you.
All right, so regular meetings, those are typically set by either ordinance or resolution at the council level. They can be directed by the council for the subordinate bodies. The regular meeting agendas have to be posted 72 hours in advance and just have a general brief description of the items of business to be transacted. It doesn't need to be an exhaustive detail, nor does it have to dictate what actions the DRC is going to take. The special meeting rules, I'm probably not going to go into this too much. The chances of DRC having a special meeting, given its meeting schedule, are probably not going to happen. But basically, the agenda has to be posted 24 hours in advance. And staff would typically handle that by consulting with the committee members to make sure that they're available for a special meeting before actually posting it. All right, so the agenda requirements, they have to be posted in a publicly accessible location and provided to people who request copies. They have to be on the city's website. And if we're doing the old-fashioned teleconferencing way, it has to be the teleconference location where that person on the DRC is appearing from. So we have the bulletin board out here in front of City Hall. That's where the agenda gets posted. It's also on the city's website. This is the important thing about the agenda. No discussion or action on items not on the posted agenda. So this is an absolute rule for special meetings. There are limited exceptions for regular meetings. There are ways to add items to the agenda, even though they didn't appear on the original agenda. It's a little complicated, but that's why we attend these meetings, to kind of walk through that. So if there's a need to take immediate action, something can be added to the agenda. I would suspect with DRC that's going to happen very infrequently. It happens from time to time at the council level where there is some need to take an immediate policy decision, so that does happen. And this is the standard here, so I just briefed you on what that was, so I won't go through it. So the agenda requirements, what are the exceptions to that general rule that you should not discuss things that are not on the agenda? You can have a brief response to a public comment. You can ask questions or clarification from staff, a brief announcement on your activities that are related to your service, request for a future report, and putting things on a future agenda. And as we mentioned, the emergency situations. The first one is the one where I get the most questions. What's a brief response? I have a rule of thumb, and I recited it again to an elected official in another city, that my rule of thumb is if the response is longer than the comment that generated the response, then it's too long. If someone gets up at the lectern and speaks for 15 seconds, a 3-minute response is too long. That's not really brief. There is no specific rule under the Brown Act. It just says a brief response to public comment. So keep that in mind, that if you are going to respond, it should be brief. All right, so the public has a right to speak on any item within the subject matter jurisdiction of the body. That's for the regular meetings, and that's why there's a general comment section. If there is something that's not on the agenda, the public has an opportunity to speak to that. The public agencies can't prohibit public criticism. When you sign up for public service on the DRC, your skin has to get thicker. That's just the nature of the beast there. And so prohibiting the public from criticizing you is a violation of the First Amendment, first and foremost. But it is going back to the original slide on this, that the people don't delegate their oversight of the public decision-making process. So that criticism is part of that. And that's just part of being a public official on that. The DRC can put reasonable regulations on public comments. The 30-minute time limit in total and 3 minutes per speaker, those are fairly common. So that is permitted. If someone wants to come in and record, they can do so, as long as it doesn't impair the conduct of the meeting. So if they came in, wanted to put really bright lights on you to get the video looking right, that's going to interfere with the meeting. So we typically would not allow that. But if someone just wants to put their phone on the table on the side and record it, that's perfectly permissible. Okay, so documents that are distributed at a meeting, they've got to be made available to the public at the same time, or after the meeting. So if someone walks up and says, I want to distribute this to the DRC, we have to make that available to the public as well. Sometimes someone will come in and say, well, I don't want anyone else to see that. And we say, well, that's not what the law says. We'll have to distribute it. All right, so the enforcement, the consequences of it, there are civil actions that can be brought by members of the public. If there's a violation of the Brown Act, the decision can be reversed. The decision can result in district attorney action for criminal prosecution. That's a possibility as well, but that requires an intent to deprive the public of information that it is entitled to. So those don't happen very often, but I have had a couple in my career where I've been in an uncomfortable situation of wrestling with the district attorney over a Brown Act issue. All right, so before we move into conflicts of interest, does anyone have any question about the Brown Act? And I'm being mindful of the time. I'm right on schedule for this, so I should be able to bring in a landing right on time. Okay, so conflicts of interest. Basically, there are a few sources of law that we have to deal with in conflicts of interest. There's the Political Reform Act, common law rules, and then Government Code Section 1090. It's basically not just actual misconduct that we're looking for, but it's the perception of misconduct. And going back to that original slide, it's the public oversight function. The public wants to make sure that you are not serving on the DRC to pad your own pockets or otherwise promote your personal interests. So we've got a whole bunch of regulations about how we deal with that. But keep in mind, just because you have a conflict of interest doesn't mean you've done anything wrong. You just shouldn't participate. In a town the size of Solvang, you're bound to have a conflict from time to time. A city the size of Los Angeles, that might not happen as often, but that's one of the nice things about working and living in a smaller community is you are invested in the community. You have a personal stake in it. You just need to make sure that that personal stake doesn't come into your decision making. So this is the rule that you should keep in mind. The Political Reform Act prohibits public officials from making, participating in, or influencing a decision in which they have a reason to know they have a material financial interest. There are regulations that the FPPC puts out that go into each of those hash points there. So making, participating in, influencing a decision, those are all covered. What is a material financial interest? That's covered as well. I will say this, if there's a conflict of interest question, it is better to get advice early rather than in hindsight. So if you have a concern, please reach out to us and we'll try to help you through that. Because the FPPC, they are very diligent and well-funded, and they do go after violations pretty rigorously. So. I won't go through this because I just mentioned it, but in any detail at least. But if it's reasonably foreseeable that the decision you're making will have a material financial effect on any of your financial interests that's different from the impact on the public generally, you shouldn't participate. So if you're making a decision about a property that is right next to your property and it could have a negative effect on your property value or a positive effect on your property value, that's the kind of thing you should be concerned about. I will frequently say that if it doesn't feel right for whatever reason, that's the time to start asking the questions. Do I have a conflict? Is there a reason I shouldn't vote on this? Because that gut feeling is there for a reason, and you can listen to that. So the materiality standards, so this is what we will look at for at least real property interests. We'll look at this 500-foot rule. It's no longer a bright line test, but if your property is within 500 feet of a property that you're considering at DRC, you should probably step down. There are some cases out there that say, well, 500 feet doesn't matter in this particular case, and I think I've got a slide on that, but generally the 500-foot rule is pretty clear. Between 500 and 1,000, we'll get into that in the next slide, and then 1,000 feet or more from your property, there's a rebuttable presumption that you don't have a financial interest in that. And staff can provide radius maps for your properties that will show you where you should be aware. excuse me. So the property between 500 and 1,000 feet, these are the things that you have to look at. If it affects the following aspects of your property, then you should probably step down. So development potential, income producing potential, and so on. Just keep in mind, if something's within 500 to 1,000 feet of your property, get advice. All right, so these are two examples that I mentioned. There was one where there was a pedestrian path that was going to be put within 500 feet of the mayor's residence. The FPPC said, yeah, there's not a conflict. That is so minor, it's not going to have an impact. And then there was a situation where there's a huge residential project more than 1,000 feet from the council member's residence, but voting on it would have a clear financial impact on that council member's residence. They said there was a conflict even though it was outside 1,000 feet. So if you take away anything from this, is it's as clear as mud. And I go back to the regulations every single time there's a question. I don't try to rely on my memory. FPPC does change its regulations, so you should reach out if you have a question. All right, I won't go through these because these are very detailed analyses of what is the exceptions to the materiality standards. Those are covered in the regulations, and those are what we analyze when we look at a conflict. Public generally exception is good to know. If you're not being impacted any differently than the rest of the community, there may be a way for you to vote on it. There's also the rule of necessity. If a decision has to be made by DRC and it can't be made by anyone else, sign permits perhaps, and three of you have a conflict, we can bring one of you back to sit and make the decision even though you have a conflict. And we draw straws typically or other random selection process to do that. I've had a couple cities where that was a fairly regular occurrence at the city council meeting, and in one city, I actually had straws in my briefcase just for that city because it happened nearly every meeting. It was a very small town, a lot of property ownership by the council members, and they had to make the final decision, so it happens. So this is the four-step analysis that the FPPC will use to determine whether there's conflict. This is the same one that we use when we try to walk you through it. So it's just basically, does the decision that you're making result in a reasonably foreseeable financial effect on one of your financial interests? So the bottom line, if you're considering whether or not there's a conflict, it's time to ask us for help, and we'll try to help you through that. If you're disqualified, this goes to that making, participating, or influencing a decision. If you are stepping down because of a conflict, you shouldn't be making phone calls to the rest of the committee members saying, this is what I feel on this, because now you're trying to influence a decision. So you have an obligation when you have a conflict to step down, identify the nature of your conflict, and then leave the chambers altogether. There is an exception, however, for your personal interests. If you have your own property that is subject to DRC approval, then you can speak on that. Or if you have a business that's controlled, there's ways that you can do that. Again, though, if that comes up, please consult with us because we want to keep you out of trouble. You may have already gotten your Form 700 requirements. What this is it allows the public to see what your financial interests are so that they can determine whether or not you should be participating. It's, again, an oversight role. I have to do them. As a result of having to do them for many years, I keep my stock ownership very simple. I just do mutual funds, so I don't have to worry about it. But at one point, I was asked here in Solvang to review a lease for the Chalk Hill Verizon facility. And at that time, I held some Verizon stock. And I said, I don't feel comfortable doing that. So I had someone else review that. But that's the kind of conflict. Reality is it wasn't going to affect my Verizon stock value at all, but I just felt uncomfortable about it, so I didn't participate in that.
How often do we do the
Form 700?
Yeah.
Typically annually.
okay, I haven't gotten any notice about it. Have
Yeah.
the rest of you? Yes. Okay.
Yeah, Anna Marie is the keeper of the Form 700. Yep. Okay, so what are the filing obligations, what are the other obligations you have? There's AB 1234, which is ethics training. That will be something that you'll need to do. And then there's sexual harassment training as well. Those have to be done. A lot of this can be done online, but it is a requirement. So what are the penalties? If for a violation of the Political Reform Act, there's the invalidation of the decision, very similar to the Brown Act. There's misdemeanor charges if the DA decides to charge it. And then there are fines and attorney's fees. I think the worst one, though, is the embarrassment, the personal and political embarrassment of making a decision that you clearly have a financial interest in. So if you need help, you can talk to your own legal counsel. I'd advise against that, and I'll tell you why in a second. You can seek advice from the FPPC. They will give you formal or informal advice. Get the formal advice. That's my advice on getting it, because informal advice doesn't insulate you against a charge from FPPC. Talking to your own legal counsel or even talking to me is a good touchstone, but I can't insulate you against an FPPC charge, and nor can your private attorney. Reliance on the advice of counsel does not work under the Political Reform Act. The only people who can insulate you against that is the FPPC itself. What we do is we help you craft a request for formal advice, because we know what the FPPC is looking for. So if there's something that you really want to know whether you can vote on it or not, and it's unclear, we'll help you craft that. And if FPPC says yes, you can vote, and you vote, then you're golden, as long as it's formal advice. I did have a situation where a council member called for informal advice. They said, yeah, go ahead and vote. He voted. FPPC came back and said, yeah, you shouldn't have voted. And we'll fine you $3,000 instead of $5,000 because you did call for informal advice and we were wrong on the informal advice line. So, yeah, so just be careful and get formal advice. All right, Levine Act, I'm going to rush through this pretty quickly. Just be careful about any contributions you may receive from someone that might affect your decisions. I don't think that happens much at DRC. It happens at the council level, but basically if someone receives greater than $500 in the prior 12 months, they're not supposed to be voting on that. Same kind of rules as you would have with the Political Reform Act, but the Levine Act was just recently applied to local entities. It has applied at the state level for many years, but they just started applying it to local government. I won't get into that because that's more at the city council level. Same kind of thing. This is just more Levine Act issues about returning the money, but you should be aware of it because I do know that sometimes DRC members will either become planning commissioners or sometimes even council members. So it's good to have at least the familiarity of it as you make your decisions in public service moving forward. You've got other conflict issues like common law conflicts. That's that pit of the stomach feeling where you think that there might be a problem, such as, oh, my brother-in-law has got a project before us. It's not really a legal conflict, but I don't really think I can treat him fairly because he's not the nicest person. Should probably step down from that one because then it's kind of a bias thing. By the same token, if you love your brother-in-law, it doesn't look so good if you're giving him everything that he's asked for as part of a project. And then there's Government Code Section 1090. That doesn't come up, but it basically prohibits a public agency member from being involved in a contract that they have approved in their official capacity. So those are the steps that you talk to for conflicts. And if in doubt, sit it out. Fair process, I'm not going to get into too much of this, but you have an obligation when you're sitting as the DRC to be fair. The applicants who come to you are entitled to due process. There are some reasons we do it the way we do it. It's to allow people to have a fair shake in making those decisions. So that's another reason why I'm here at these meetings, is to help you through those if there's questions on it. So that's the due process clause under the Fifth Amendment. And I'm gonna rush through it because I'm just about out of time here. I do want to talk about a little bit the Public Records Act. And basically, the Public Records Act allows members of the public to inspect public records. That's a pretty broad definition. Some things that you would think are not public records may be. So if you send a text message to someone who has talked to you about a project coming to the DRC and you do it on your personal phone, that's a public record, even though it's on your personal phone. So you may be asked at some point by Anna Marie to sign a declaration that you have searched your personal devices for emails or texts relating to the public's business. My advice is try to avoid using your cell phone for that if you can, but I know it happens because people's cell phones are typically the primary way they can communicate. the public records are not just text messages. They can be voicemails, they can be emails, they can be tweets, photos, videos, and actual paper. That's what it was originally intended to, but with technology, they've had to move forward and apply it to all manner of communication that relates to the public's business. And I mentioned this, avoid combining public and private if you can. If there are emails that are talking about business and you're sending it from your personal account may now be subject to disclosure under the Public Records Act. So just keep that in mind. I won't go into the exceptions because those are something that we deal with on our side, but there are exceptions to what can be disclosed under the Public Records Act. And then there's the balancing test that generally the courts will tip in favor of disclosure. So if we try to assert there's an exemption, courts don't like those, and they will tell us, no, you probably should disclose. And with that, I'm a minute or two over. Sorry about that, but thank you for your attention, and happy to answer any questions for those of you that remain.
Thank you. Any questions? And I know Melissa Bates is now stepping out for a prior commitment. Thank you, Melissa. See you in March. All right, any questions of our attorney? Thank you, Dave.
You're welcome. And I'm going to send this slide deck to Anna Marie for distribution to you all, so you'll have that. And if any of it generates any questions for you, feel free to reach out to me.
Okay, and
I
Brandy?
just wanted to provide a couple of clarifications. Just because you send a text and then delete it doesn't mean that it is not subject to public records. And those things are discoverable with the proper software. So what I tell my staff is if you don't want to see it as the front page of the newspaper, don't send it. The other thing I wanted to point out, and early on in talking about the meetings, you can go and be all together and talking about NBA scores, but you have to think about what the public's going to see and think. So a lot of what you need to think about is the perception. And it's unfortunate, but again, with social media, and they were all, I had a situation in Glenn County where the Board of Supervisors would get together for lunch after the supervisor meeting, and they were all at the same restaurant. And it was like, dude, that's not a good idea. But, so just, again, keep that in mind. You're not breaking the law, but people may think you are.
It's the perception as well as the actual understood.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you for expanding on that, Randy, and making it for sure that we can't socialize. No after-meeting drinking allowed together. Let me clarify. Okay, so at this point, I think we move on to... Well, it says public comment, but I don't think there's public comment. Is there?
No public here.
Yeah, for anything to speak of. Okay, so public comment is now closed. We're going to move on to committee member comments. Anybody have comments here? Okay, I just have a quick question. At the last meeting, which obviously didn't include anybody but me that's here tonight, there was a discussion about abandoned signs and coming back with some information about that. Just kind of circling back and putting the reminder.
Yeah, we
there.
can discuss that as part of our workshop.
Yeah,
That'd
perfect.
probably be the more appropriate.
Yeah,
part.
yeah, not tonight, but just to kind of circle back on that. That's the only thing I had. Thank you for, I guess my comment would be thank you for putting together the packet with the information, a lot of information. That was very good, especially considering there's new people. It's hard, even when you've been doing this. So appreciate the thoroughness of the work of staff to put together the packet. Thank you. And then we go on to item 7, city staff comments.
Well, thank you. So planning manager update. So as you all know, we finally decided on a date for our signs and design workshop. So we put out our first social media post about this today. Mark your calendars, March 13th, 6 o'clock here. If you can't make it, I would encourage to meet with me separately. I'll go over what we're going to go over, and we're able to jot down your thoughts on how we're going to move forward. So essentially this item will focus on a few things. The first one is the objective design standards, and specifically what are we doing with them in terms of there was a discussion at the council in regards to 6 particular properties, whether we want to keep them in the design district. These are all actually residential properties, or do we want to remove them? And if we remove them, then do we just want to then limit the amount of residential units that can be done in the village, so thereby keeping the ability to be subjective on our decisions, even though we have objective standards. So you kind of got a taste of how the objective standards work when its items are subjective in terms of the commercial property this evening. So that's going to be one item, and then the other one, we're talking signs. So we did have a discussion today about sign exceptions. And we are looking to go forward with objective sign standards. So we will have a slew of questions for you. It's going to be interactive. Bring your phone, because we'll have some fun surveys. With that being said, March on our planning commission is rather light. We have just the annual housing and general plan report. It's very meaty on that, so that's our only item for the month of March. April will now have the item that was for you this evening. In other news, our Wildwood EIR contract was approved by the city council. So city staff will be meeting with our now internal project team, including RINCON, at the beginning of March to kick off the environmental impact, or excuse me, the CEQA analysis and initial study. We currently received a pre-application for a new MRI room in addition at Cottage Hospital. So depending on how quickly we can get our comments in, this actually might be one of your March items. So again, pre-application allows us all the gloves are off, which is great. But at the same token, this is a great project, especially for residents here in the Valley, in terms of having additional services at Cottage Hospital, such as an MRI machine. Saves a lot of people a trip, which is fantastic. There's a lot of social media chatter in regards to 1693 Mission Drive. As many of you know, there were quite a numerous amount of sycamore trees that were cut down. City staff did actually issue a permit for the entire parking lot rehabilitation. What that means is...
Back up a second.
Yeah.
16, I'm not a social media person. What's that? What is that?
Den Market Square.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So, sorry.
I haven't, so that's already taken place.
Yeah, so city staff issued a building permit back in December, or excuse me, in January. I'm getting my months here mixed up, for a non-entitlement parking lot rehabilitation. So the property owner is actually rehabilitating the entire parking lot, which means compacting it back to its form. The sycamore trees were planted as a part of the original Den Market Square project, but they weren't the best parking lot trees. Even old or whatever, they were tearing up the sidewalk and tearing up the asphalt. City doesn't have any ordinances in regards to tree removals on private property. So as a part of that, we reviewed their landscaping plan. They are doing substantial amount of replantings and new shrubs and water efficient landscaping in there. So those trees will be replaced. It is rather sad, and I'm a tree lover myself, but unfortunately, you can only spec certain trees to go in certain applications, and sycamores are not one of those. So, but those will be replanted soon. Last two items deal with our new zoning ordinance. One of the bigger parts of our new zoning ordinance was eliminating this idea of residential uses as secondary uses here in the village, or formerly known as TRC. So we had to go through some archaic computations and then figure out, is it less than 800 square feet? And if it is, it can be a unit, and it can't be. We kind of ditched all that. And so we basically said, we want to give our property owners flexibility here in the village. So we're advocating mixed use. Our general plan's advocating mixed use. So, commercial uses on the first floor, second and third floor and above can be residential. If you're horizontal, we want to see the commercial up front. And if you want to do residential uses in the back, fine by me. With that being said, in less than the 6 weeks this thing has been in place, city staff has received inquiries on 2 particular properties for a total of over 40 units to be converted of non-used commercial spaces and offices that have sat vacant for years into residential units. These were never envisioned by our arena numbers. These were never envisioned by our consultants from that worked on the general plan, but instead it was done by just brainstorming with the city manager and myself and others. So that is really good news because, again, it gives our property owners the flexibility. Whether or not they become applications is a different story. Actually, one of them did become an application tonight. Thank you, Lisa. And finally, another property owner has also come forward with wanting to do a horizontal mixed use. So again, utilizing these spaces, we get credit for every single housing unit that's created, which is great. The property owners rehabilitate those spaces, which therefore causes their property taxes to go up and valuation to go up, which means we get more property taxes, which means we get more people in the village at a 24/7 clip. Means hopefully more things are open later. It's and housing is provided. So it's a great what I call circle of life.
And this was big time the intent of the general plan update. We worked really hard to look at the residential uses within the village mixed use. That's the right name,
It very much was, and it was always a policy in the last two general plans, just never implemented. So we just implemented it.
I think you're going to see, I feel you're going to see a lot more owners in the village come forward because the rents that they can get, I think you're going to see a win-win.
Right. And again, it's utilizing tools that were readily available to us. Our city manager has never told the planning manager and director to go for it. So I put myself out there.
I think it's great.
Well, and it's also impacting so positively the RENA numbers. It's going to make for a lot less required infill in other residential areas.
Yeah, and that's hopefully the key. So
Yeah.
anyways, that's all I got. But it just, again, I know there was a lot of apprehension to our zoning ordinance update and the size of it. But as city staff had mentioned at city council meetings, the net positive is enormous, and we're already reaping those benefits just 5 weeks in.
Congratulations.
That's great news. And I have a quick question for you regarding the mixed use. Has it been changed, the percentages? Is that, remember the 49, 51 and all that?
Those aren't changed.
Okay.
So again, what we're seeing forward are actually no exterior changes. What we're seeing is a
Right.
lot of conversions.
Right.
Which is actually really what we want.
Yeah.
But we'll discuss that 49, the percentage change at the workshop.
Okay, that was really where I was going with that. And just to be real clear, the workshop is not a Brown Act meeting, so we can discuss that with the community and encourage participation.
It will be an interactive session. So you are part of the general plan, my one and only GPAC meeting where I trotted out some cool slides and people got to guess things. Well, we're running the same thing. So we're going to be an interactive session and with QR codes and live updating of slides just to get an idea, gauge. And it's interactive, so I am hoping for a good turnout, so at least people can participate and have a say.
Yeah.
And just to clarify, it is a Brown Act meeting, but it is a workshop. There's a lot more flexibility. The agenda will be put out because there is, again, a majority of the body talking about things that are related to what you're responsible for. So the DRC and the Planning Commission will be a joint meeting. I'm sure there'll be council members here. And so it will be a publicly noticed Brown Act subject meeting, but we're going to create the agenda so that it's more of a free-flowing workshop, interchange of ideas.
And no 3-minute limitations.
No, the 3, yeah, that can be dispensed with. That's not a
Right.
Brown Act requirement,
Right.
the 3 minutes.
Yeah. So just to be really clear, if I'm talking to a planning commissioner about this in advance, really just more about the fact that there is a meeting, that's okay. But if we're talking about content of the meeting, that is,
Well,
I can't talk to.
Here's the thing, the planning commission is not this body. So
Right.
you
It doesn't matter.
It does matter
Perception.
in the sense of if you talk to 3 planning commissioners about something and you say, I'm really excited about this change or this option, you could be
the hub in that wheel, because now you're communicating, and you're not the one that's going to get in trouble in that situation. It's the planning commissioners that will get into
Oh,
trouble.
so it's okay. No.
By the same token, if you have one planning commissioner speaking to 3 of you about something, that planning commissioner is not going to be the one that gets in trouble. It's going to be you that get in trouble for that. So just keep that in the back of your mind.
Yeah, it's more about encouraging participation rather than content.
Yeah, and that's outside the meeting. If you're doing it inside the meeting and it's been agendized, it's great.
That's what a workshop is.
Yeah,
Okay.
and the agenda itself and the staff report, actually, it's going to be pretty light. Because again, the idea is to present items so that we actually have a very free flow conversation and get the feedback that we need to move forward, whether it be signs or stay put with the objective standards and refine those through other manners, which we've sort of discussed earlier.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. All right, any other staff comments? Okay, it is 7:16 and we are adjourned. Thank you.